What's up, YouTube? So I realized I haven't actually uploaded much in terms of testing Orcish Bowmaster in these Dimir lists. And I've got a few backlog videos of that, so hey, why not start working through those? Bowmaster is like one of the hot topics right now. People are wanting to see how it plays out, how many copies we think we should run, if any. So let's do that. Yeah, I've got my kind of core shell of Dimir already. With for me, Shadow Immortality has been like an all-star recently. The 4-4 split of Counterspell and Drowning Lock, not really a split if it's just four of both. 4 Thoughtseize, 4 Shadow, 4 Consider. I did cut a third Stubborn Denial and a second copy of Dress Down for the 2 Orcish Bowmasters. Brazen Borrower over Archmage's Charm. I kind of wanted to see how it felt with just a couple copies of Bowmaster. So the Bow need to come up with a nickname for Bowmaster. It might just be Bow for the moment. But Bow's pretty good in like 4 of situations, because when it's good, it's good. But when you have Bow being less good, you don't really want a whole like slew of them in your hand. So my thought process here is with Dimir, you're really wanting to close out the game quickly as soon as you get a threat down. Bow doesn't really go along with that plan too well. So I kind of wanted to try out like a value couple copies of Bowmaster and maybe see them from time to time when they're good, but not get flooded on them when they're bad. Because a lot of matchups like the mono red Coldotha decks and stuff like that, Bowmaster is very, very good when you see the first copy. If it's like come down, ping a dude on entry, token trades off with a dude, they crack a star, sphere, clue token, cycle from a blood token, whatever, you get another Bowmaster trigger, kill another dude, make another token, block another guy. It really, really snowballs. So that's kind of what we're looking out for is, are we seeing enough Bowmasters to have them when we want them, but not so many that we're not drawing multiple copies when we don't. But let's go ahead and jump in. If you've seen any of the previous Dimir videos, you know the list pretty well. You kind of know what my thought process is on things like Shadow of Mortality. But as always, if you have questions, that's why there's a comment section down below, so you can ask whatever you feel like. Otherwise, if you're enjoying the commentary, enjoying the content, feel free to drop a like and subscription. Lets you know whenever new videos are getting posted. Doesn't cost you anything on YouTube. Other than that, have a link to the deck list down below. Link to the Twitch channel if you want to come check out a live stream. Link to the Twitter if you want to know when the live stream is going live. Let's go ahead and hop in. I've also got like backlog videos of Jund to upload, Jund Shadow. Couple more Dimir. I think there's like another zoo video or two. So we're slowly working through. All right, so opponent's got a halfling on turn 1. Street Wraith misses on a removal spell, so we're just hoping no to fairy. And yep. All right, so we can pretty well just scoop it up here because we still don't have an answer to this halfling. They've got a Teferi now, so we're not interacting very well. We can't counterspell. We've got some threats that really don't matter much in the face of like uncounterable legendary spells. So I think we're just gonna go to game 2. Like when your opponent's got 2 planeswalkers on board, a mana dork, and like 6 cards in hand, you kind of accept maybe this isn't our game. Maybe we just need to go to the next one. And the next one, we are able to snipe something early. So snipe the Wren. Even though they can't play it with the basic island, they were just like a fetch land away from having it online. They found the fetch land. So now we get to hopefully tempo a little bit better, being able to counter or take the Wren, kill the halfling, We've got the counterspell for the Teferi. We don't really care about the Fable here. We can just like take out the token, get in a big attack. And we are just presenting lethal next turn if our opponent doesn't find a copy of Solitude. So, fingers crossed. Nope. So they found both a Solitude and an Omnath. Pretty rough for the home team. But at least we know, like, the rest of their hand after we counter this second copy of the ring that they had. At least we know the rest of their hand is just, or no, the Halfling's gone. They ditched it. Turok, fantastic top deck. Even if it's just a leyline binding. But, alright. Counterspell makes us feel, I don't want to say okay, because we still need like another threat or a way to get Turok a little bit bigger. Realistically, we could probably ignore the Ren, or at least I would be more inclined to ignore the Ren if the Turok was a 4-3, or if I had like one more threat here. So our counter spells are pretty dead at this point with the Halfling, but we could just find some threats, get some pressure down. Maybe I'm supposed to have started attacking into this reflection earlier. All right, Teferi's fine. They can't bounce our Turok. Bounce their Fable, though. Pretty cool move from them. Also could have just Fatal Pushed the Goblin token. But, I don't know. I feel like I'm in a position where I don't really need to be, like, super, super aggressive. I can kind of save the Fatal Push for, like, an Omnath or something. But, like, here, they don't have the ability to bounce anything. We do happen to top deck a mURktide and kind of get out of there a little bit, fortunately. Now, this is kind of a hand that, like, a month ago, I would have been very, very skeptical of against these 4-color piles. But now, like, having a Fatal Push on turn 1 for the Halfling is ideal. And then being able to follow it up with a Shieldred's Edict for a Teferi or a Ren or a Counterspell, whatever the case may be. And then Turok is just like an absolute lights out bomb against the 4 or 5 color piles. Like dodging Leyline Binding, Prismatic Ending, Teferi Bounce, Solitude. Huge. Huge. But if my opponent wants to cast a ring next turn, they do have to sack this Misty, which puts the 4th card in the yard, lets Drown in the Lock counter a ring. They do go for Endurance on themselves, which is a little less fortunate for us, but I'm kind of okay with the Endurance because it's going to get me down to Shadow range, and I still get to hold up Counterspell here. So we're just like working towards these Drown in the Locks being live again. I can drown like a Prismatic Ending. Can't drown a Fury, but hey, they're going to hit me in the face again, which means I get closer to another Shadow. Or we just Turok. Turok away the last 2 cards seems pretty decent, because if they don't find like a Lightning Bolt, which I don't think they play many of, if any, anymore, then I just get down Shadow. I probably should have just attacked with the Turok last turn. I kind of felt like I didn't really need to. Like, the Turok attacking through for 4 doesn't really matter. But, yeah. This is... I'm going to pause real quick. this is like a really good example of why Bowmaster isn't as good in Dimir as it is the other shells. Like, you really want your threats in this Dimir list to be, hey, drop this down, protect it for 2 turns, the game is over. And Bowmaster doesn't fit that mold. Bowmaster fits like the, oh, I'm holding up counterspell. My opponent didn't cast anything relevant. I'm just going to flash in Bowmaster and have this like 10 turn clock sitting around. And that's fine in some situations. When you can ping down like a threat and save a removal spell or save a counter spell, it's a whole lot better. But when you have a situation like this, where you're at whatever life, your opponent's at a high life, you need to get your opponent from a high life to a low life very, very quickly. This is where the threats in Dimir really shine, like the Shadow of Mortality, mURktide. We've also had a lot better win percentage against like the 4 or 5 color piles than I would have thought. So that's been really cool. Even with the ring, like we just have a lot of decent tools against that. All right, so these situations, I usually like going for the consider first. I'm kind of surprised that I went for the fatal push, and it's mostly because the consider like doesn't, what's a consider's good when you know what you want to look for, but it's also good when you don't want to just like be doing nothing. And for a turn like that, if I fatal push, I know I'm not, or I don't want to be considering on my main phase. So when I fatal push on their turn to hit the channeler, go to my turn with consider and draw a land. Now I just have consider and a shadow, and like my best line becomes consider because I could hit a Thoughtseize, and I'm not going to be able to consider into a counter spell anyway. So what I usually like to do instead of that is turn 1 consider, even in the face of Dragon's Rage Channeler, and give myself a chance to draw something live, untap, have fatal push. In this case, I would have had the drown to pass the turn with my mana open, and then talk about like fatal pushing into turn and just take that first hit, especially with the Dragon's Rage Channeler. If it was a Ragavan, it's probably different, but a lot of it is just making decisions based on kind of what's on board. And then here, just be mana efficient, get this Shredder off the board, we get to push a Channeler, get an attack in. I've started trying to adapt this role of like being more aggressive in this Dimir or in this blue-red matchup. And it's mostly because I feel if I put my opponent on the back foot a little bit more, I am still possibly dead to them just having like bolt or bolt breach or something. But if I put my opponent more on the back foot, then I feel I can kind of control the tempo of the game a little bit better. Especially true against mURktide, but it counts against like the Giganta Underworld Breach decks as well. So opponent bobbles themselves, sees that it is not a lightning bolt, scoops it up because it would be just dead if they played out Giganta. Usually in those situations, just for everybody watching the video, not necessarily for my opponent. If you have the bobble and you know that if you play the Giganta, you're dead on board, just bobble your opponent. Like, bobble your opponent past the turn, because bobbling yourself is like this defensive lined play where it's, hey, I'm going to bobble myself, see if it's a bolt. If it's not a bolt, I scoop. But if you bobble your opponent, you're not changing the card on top of your library. If you bobble your opponent, then maybe you get some piece of information just in case the card on top is a bolt. But if it's a bolt, the game's over. It doesn't really matter. But you can't change the top card of your library anyway. So it's either a bolt or it's not a bolt. So there's no real reason to like look to see if it's a bolt unless you just really aggressively want to save that 4 seconds passing the turn and drawing on their upkeep. Which, if that's the case, power to you, but I don't think that's a strong incentive to play. I don't even want to call it like playing suboptimally. It's just like a line that doesn't really matter. Anyway, here's a Bowmaster. So we do have Counterspell backup. We've got Fatal Push backup. And this is like the raise the alarm mode on Bowmaster, where it's, hey, I'm going to flash in this 2 mana, 2 1/1s and just kind of see what happens. And yeah, like protect the queenish style with old Grixis Shadow. Like if you put any threat on board and you protect it with enough counter spells, there's a good chance it's going to go the distance. And I think that's what Bowmaster kind of represents in some of these matches. Just, hey, this thing, like, it really does not matter what it is. It just happens to be Bowmaster at this particular spot. Like, to put it into perspective, do you realize how insane Brineborn Cutthroat would have looked right there when you have Cutthroat hitting for 2? Oh, counterspell, counterspell, you spell pierce. Now all of a sudden my Cutthroat's a 5/4 and the game's over like 3 turns sooner at least. So in those games, I have to specify because people like to take comments out of context. In those games where Orcish Bowmaster is raise the alarm, Brineborn Cutthroat would be better. But against some of the small aggro decks and things like that, where Brineborn Cutthroat gets stonewalled pretty quickly, in those games, Bowmaster is usually a little bit better. All right, so I think I'd started off on like the wrong game. Now we're just going around. Thought-Seizing Ledger Shredders. Our opponent's got 4 lands left and then a Ragavan hit. Top deck of Thoughtseize for one of our shadows. But we do still have another shadow, so that's kind of cool. Right? Right? We can save Shadow from the clutches of an Unholy Heat if it comes to that. Drowning Lock's pretty good pickup. Let's talk about these situations. So I can attack him with Shadow and like make it a 2-turn clock. Plan on dress downing or drowning locking my opponent's Ragavan. But what I kind of want to avoid is a situation where I go for like a counter spell or removal spell and they have a counter. So if I go for attack with Shadow, they take it, they attack back, I go for drown and they go spell pierce. Then I run into the risk of them hitting something relevant and me like falling behind. So I really don't want to start attacking into the Ragavan until I have the board clear, which means passing the turn to my opponent. If they have like an expressive iteration or something off the top, then I counterspell it, go to the next turn cycle, do the same thing again. Or if I find a 4th land, I can dress down plus hold up drown. But if they don't, then I can just end a turn, like go to drown the Ragavan, untap, attack with Shadow, have counterspell back up. But if you get in a situation like this where you just like have a second threat, you're kind of solid. You'll hear all the time like first main phase you play your land, second main phase you play your spells. That's usually the case, but right there I wanted to check for a counter spell. So I played and see, told you, opponents draw counter spells. Happens all the time. But I wanted to make sure that my Shadow of Mortality resolved before I attacked with the Shadow. So that's why I played the Shadow of Mortality before combat. If I had attacked and then played the Shadow of Mortality, my opponent counterspelled it, then I could have been in a world of hurt. Okay, so what happened last round was game 1, my opponent mulled to Oblivion and scooped, and then game 2, we won. I thought I had started the wrong match, but nope, they just mulled to Oblivion and scooped. It's the joy of having extra monitors. You can kind of like covertly go over and see what's going on. Why this worked the way it did. All right, Rakdos. See Thoughtseize, we see Ragavan. We don't know if we're up against Rakdos Scam or just like Rakdos mid-range yet. More than likely Scam, definitely the more popular of the archetypes at the moment. Bowmasters is a solid draw because at least this is a situation where it is raise the alarm more than likely, but raise the alarm might be all I need. Go for the Blood Moon. We go for the no. You have a lot of no's in the deck. All right. Finding the extra land is really nice. I would have preferred it be a black source so I could like Thoughtseize plus do something, but you know, doesn't always work that way. Then I was actually really surprised that they went for the Undying effect here, especially staring down a Bowmaster. Like, as soon as I play a Bowmaster, that Ragavan doesn't matter anymore. Like, if you want to attack into it, I've got blocks, but at this point, you're just like burning through cards to try to save this Ragavan. This is the third iteration of the same Ragavan. So this time we're going to use the removal spell in their combat step so that if they... Or no, we're taking the Shadow. Oh, this is the hit to try to kill the Ragavan into turn. Untap, find a land, and get Shadow down. Like, have Shadow enable Stubborn Denial. So now I've got, yeah, Ferocious Shadow. I've got Stub. Hope they don't have back-to-back removal spells. Dang. All right, but they are empty-handed. Ragavan whiffs, which means now I've got kind of the initiative on board. Yeah. So taking the hit from Ragavan was intentional to get Ferocious Shadow and just kind of hope that they whiffed. I could have gone for a Fatal Push or a Drown or something. But I do kind of like that line of giving them one Ragavan hit and seeing if it matters. So I applaud the line. I don't always applaud the lines that I take. Actually, I very rarely applaud the lines that I take. But sometimes you really like playing the odds. For example, we're playing a deck that's predominantly like counter spells and threats that depend on your life total. So there's a very reasonable chance that they could whiff with a Ragavan hit. They could hit something like they could hit a counter spell and it doesn't matter. They could hit a way to lower our life total and it doesn't matter. Or a threat that depends on our life total, like a Shadow of Mortality, a Shadow, whatever. Yeah, so here we played out the mURktide because they usually don't have. Going back to playing the odds, we play out the mURktide because Scam usually doesn't have a lot of ways to deal with mURktide. Maybe like a few copies of Terminate, maybe a Shieldred's Edict or two, something like that. But because Thoughtseize saw that they only had the one Terminate and we took it, then we're just playing the odds that they're not going to find another way to deal with mURktide right away, whether that be like another Fury plus an Undying effect or another Terminate. We're just running the numbers and deciding that this is the best course of action. Then I think this is round number 5. So Fiery Islet, no companion. We would assume mURktide. Bobble Bolt, consider, pretty well confirms that. Thoughtseize is a good draw. Counterspell my Thoughtseize. We will Stubborn Denial a counterspell because I'm not doing anything else with my mana. See, Expressive Iteration, a couple Unholy Heats, a Brazen Borrower, the land they just top decked. They do not have Delirium, but they will as soon as they put Scalding Tarn in the yard. So I could play Shadow and try to like fight over Unholy Heat's counterspell, but I'd rather just get Shadow down as like a 7/7 so that they have to waste multiple spells dealing with it. Or you get this beautiful scenario where you play out Shadow. They go for the counter spell, you counter their counter, and they only have the mana for one Unholy Heat left over. So now you get to kind of stifle that, make the second Unholy Heat dead. All right, so now we're feeling pretty good. We've got a Shadow. We've got a way to get the Shadow up to a 10/10 or a 13/13 with Dress Down. We've got Fatal Push for the Brazen Borrower. We've got Counterspell for some sort of follow-up or for a Pyromancer. No, I'm definitely not a big fan of just like running out the Dress Down for no reason. I'd rather save it in case they top deck like a mURktide or something. And then here, since they're going for Spyro tokens, I just have the double removal spell for those. But I think a lot of times you'll see me in videos like fire off Dress Down just to cycle it into turn. And that's usually just to try to find some more gas. But in a situation like that where I know my opponent's cards and I don't really need the gas, then I can just kind of hold on to it for a worst case scenario sort of situation. Uh, could cycle Street Wraith looking for Thoughtseize, but I don't really want to use up the Wraith just yet. Like we just saw, we got our opponent last game pretty bad by cycling a Wraith and getting to set up a Shadow growing to 7 to dodge an Unholy Heat. And it's not necessarily that I think that line plays out that often. It's more that I don't want to lose life at just like this reckless reckless pace, because then you start running into the issue of you can't take that life loss back. All right, so they're very clearly representing counterspell, which is why I went for the petty theft instead of the Bowmaster. Wanted to make sure the Bowmaster resolved. They did have the counterspell, took out the Brazen Borrower, which is absolutely okay with me. Fluster Storm over Drown so that I can follow up with a Shadow if I see that the coast is clear. If not, I can just play out the Otawara, hold up, drown in the lock, like so. I did think this is a really funny situation because this is like one of the first few leagues that I was testing Bowmaster, and I was talking about how it was raise the alarm so often. And then I thought to use my opponent and see Seasoned Pyromancer Jace the Mind Sculptor, and I'm just like, you know what? That's raise the alarm with a tiny bit of upside. Like opponents not playing out their Jace because they're afraid of the Bowmaster. But we get to dress down a Shadow, get a big chunk of damage in here. Now we know their last card's Jace the Mind Sculptor, so we can drown and lock that, or if they have a different play, we can drown and lock. Yeah, so just Jace. Drown and lock's going to seal the deal. Now let's talk about the list. Usually in the description of the video, I'll leave the current, like my current list, not necessarily the one that's on screen. So I think the current one I've been messing around with 4 Bowmasters instead of the 2. As we did see in that league, there were a couple opportunities where Bowmaster was just 2 mana, ping your opponent for 1, make 2 1/1s, and it was able to kind of close the distance because we backed it up with a bunch of counter spells. There were a couple instances where Bowmaster did ping off Ragavan. I do want to be objective and say that most of the time when Bowmaster pinged something off, we had the removal spell anyway, but might as well use the Bowmaster if we had it, or if we were playing it. If it wasn't a Bowmaster in that situation, it would have been either another stub or dress down, or maybe like an Archmage's Charm, something like that. So take those situations with a grain of salt. Like, would Archmage's Charm or another removal spell or something have been better? Don't know. Shadow Mortality looked solid. If you saw it there, especially against like Scam, dodging Fury, standing in front of Fury, dodging Lightning Bolt, Fatal Push, Unholy Heat, Prismatic Ending. Like, the card gets around a lot of common removal right now, which is really, really nice and kind of what you want out of your threats in this deck. You want to, in Dimir, you really want to get to like turn 4, turn 5, and have the ability to play out a 1 or 2 mana threat, a Shadow, a mURktide for 2, a Shadow of Mortality for 2, and hold up Counterspell, or like Counterspell plus Stub, Drown plus Stub, Counterspell, Drown plus Push, something like that, and close out the game in like 2 or 3 turns, just protecting your big threat. So Bowmaster, like, doesn't always fit that mold, but it can be a reasonable value threat. But we'll keep messing around with it, keep trying it, see how it goes. Otherwise, as always, if you're enjoying the video, let me know down below. If there's something you're really wanting to see, let me know that as well. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe, enjoy some good food and company, and I will catch you back live later. Adios for now.